So right now my garage is being rebuilt, and one of the doors is gone because the whole frame needs to be rebuilt and it's taking longer than expected. There's no door at the moment. No big deal, it's just a garage. The house will survive if a raccoon or something gets in. But I'm not kidding. This happened just like 20 minutes ago. My cat ran outside behind me, and like an hour after that happened, I could hear him and the neighbor's cat fighting. I try to keep my cat inside, but he's fast. He'll run between my legs and right out the door. Okay, so cat got out. Him and the other cat are making some noise. Pretty average night so far. And then they get louder and a bit louder. And then I hear what had to have been a fox, but Jesus, it sounded like a recording of a human. Like, I'm not lying, and I guess I'm pretty sure it was a fox, but you know what? Fox, Cthulhu, either way, I'm not gonna go back out tonight. Fuck that. So, why am I posting this? I've had experiences with skinwalkers before. I've got another story out there. I sort of thought that it had lost interest in me because it's been a few years, but after hearing that scream, just, no thanks. I'll stay inside. I don't know how many people will read this or how many will believe it. Frankly, I don't care. I know that this happened, my brother knows it, and even local law enforcement believes some of it. This happened on a ranch that my brother and I lease in eastern Montana. The ranch in question is massive, covering about 18 sections. A section is 1 square mile, or 640 acres, and it's 2/3 deeded, the rest being either BLM or state-owned. This land is incredibly rugged, being covered in clay hills and deep canyons, and is for the most part unfenced. There are several buffalo jumps on the ranch, where hundreds of years ago the natives would chase the herds of buffalo off the cliffs to their death. You can find buffalo bones at these sites. Supposedly, the ranch was also the site of a massacre, where an entire village of Hidatsa were killed by their enemies, the Sioux, although I haven't found any official records of that incident. Also on the ranch are 2 abandoned homesteads, the Mint Place and the Carter Place. The Mint homestead is merely 1 mile off the county road and relatively easy to access, so my brother and I still use the dated cattle pens that are part of it. The Carter Place is more remote, however, only being accessible on horseback as the trail that went into it washed out many years ago. All that's left of the Carter Place is a log cabin with a roof caving in, an old corral system, and a barn that has toppled over. The last people that lived in the Carter house was the Carter family themselves. But during the 1930s, the father went crazy, murdered the entire family before turning the gun on himself. At least that's what people said. The ranch's current owners live in California and have owned the ranch since purchasing it from the Mint family. This was during the 1980s. My brother and I started leasing the ranch in 2007. There was some unusual activity at first, mainly random lights, but nothing that couldn't be explained in a reasonable way. The real strangeness began in 2017, after a well was drilled on the property. I wonder now if this may have unleashed something. During the fall of 2017, I was searching for strays on horseback when I was approached by 2 frantic hunters. The hunters claimed that they were being stalked by a pack of wolves, but I was dismissive. There hadn't been any wolves in the area since the 1920s. The hunters claimed they knew the difference between coyotes and wolves, and were absolutely certain that what was stalking them was wolves. Whatever it was had seriously bothered them. Later in the year, we were trucking cattle away from the ranch and back to the home place. We found out that we were a dozen head short. Despite us running 600 cattle on the property, we kept very close tabs on the herd. It was unusual to lose more than 2. But no matter how many times we searched and recounted, we could not find the missing cattle. This began a trend, and so far since 2017, there have been a total of 138 unaccounted cattle, a financial loss of $165,000. Though there are many odd events that I could recount, this is one that stands out. This took place in October of 2020. Myself, my brother, and my brother's eldest son were gathering the cattle and herding them to the Mint homestead, where they could be loaded onto trucks and taken to our home ranch for the winter. By this point, the weird activity on the ranch had increased, so much so that we never went to the ranch without being armed. This day was no exception. Strapped to the saddle under my left leg was a Winchester .30-30 rifle. The morning went well. By noon, we'd gathered 200 head, which we penned up at the Mint place. After eating a quick lunch, my brother and nephew loaded their horses and left. My nephew had a football game later that day. I stayed alone and rode northwest toward the Carter homestead. The first strange thing to happen was when I rode down a canyon. As I was riding, I could hear multiple howls and cries coming from all directions. I cannot describe what these howls sounded like because they were like nothing I'd heard, not before or since. As I continued riding in the canyon, I was overcome with a feeling of dread. My horse, Ace, seemed to pick up on this as well, began spooking at almost every shadow. This was very out of character for him, as he was usually a very calm and collected horse. The second strange thing was when I approached the Carter homestead. As I crested a hill in front of it, something jumped out of the old log cabin and ran in the opposite direction. I was still close to a mile away, so I had to use my binoculars to get a better look. What I saw through the lenses chilled me to the bone. It was a wolf, but it was massive, solid black. It was so large it could have been mistaken for a black bear, but it was undeniably canine. After seeing the wolf, my gut told me to turn around, come back later with company, but I ultimately continued. Throughout the course of the afternoon, I managed to convince myself that the wolf I saw was nothing more than a coyote, and its black fur was just a shadow. It was nearing dusk before I arrived back at the Mint place, herding 30 head of cattle in front of me. After I penned the cattle up, I led Ace back to my pickup and horse trailer. From a distance, I could see that something was wrong with the trailer. As I approached, I found that the axle had come apart. It didn't make any sense to me. It was fine when I drove it in, but there was no explanation as to what could have made it come apart when it wasn't moving. By this time, it was fairly dark outside, and as we were coming out the next day, I decided to unhook the trailer, leave Ace at the corrals overnight. When I left, I saw 3 blue lights near the corrals, but I attributed these lights to hunters and continued driving. I also heard some more of those howls, the ones I'd heard earlier in the day. When all 3 of us arrived the next morning, we found the corrals in a total mess. All the grass was turned up inside the corrals where the cattle had been milling. The fence was broken in several places. The cattle that were penned up the night before were nowhere to be found, along with Ace. My brother and nephew took off on horseback, trying to locate some of the cattle and Ace, but they only managed to find around 20 head. As I was without a horse, we repaired the trailer and left later in the afternoon. The next day, all 3 of us rode. We searched exclusively for Ace. During this time, I covered a lot of country that I would have otherwise missed, and I discovered more bizarre things. At the bottom of one of the canyons were hundreds of holes, about 1 foot in diameter and 3 foot deep. These holes had to have been dug by people, as there would be no animal that would have dug them. I also found a bone pile, which was exceptionally strange. There were the carcasses of 4 cows, all piled on top of each other in an area that they typically would not have accessed. At first, I thought that this was the act of poachers who were illegally killing and butchering cattle at the ranch. But there would have been no way to get to this location with a pickup or a 4-wheeler, for that matter. The more we searched, the less sense everything made. We searched for 3 days before we came across something. My brother radioed me. We had no cell service. He told me that he thought they found Ace. My nephew and I rode to his location, and sure enough, at the bottom of a sinkhole, which are pretty common in our area, was the carcass of Ace, along with 3 cows. The sinkhole was at the bottom of a canyon, with the walls of this canyon being 300 feet tall, the sinkhole being another 20 feet deep. It took an hour just to climb down the canyon walls. When I finally approached the sinkhole, I found Ace to be heavily mutilated. Both ears were removed, along with the eyes, nostrils, hooves. The back of him was not exposed, but it looked like his tail had been removed. The cows surrounding also had similar mutilations. As was the case with the howls, the wolf, and the trailer, none of this made sense. It would have been almost impossible for just 1 cow to end up in this location, let alone 3 cows and a horse. There were also no tracks leading into or out of the sinkhole or canyon. The sheriff and veterinarian were both notified and an investigation was launched. The ultimate conclusion was that something had caused the cattle to spook and break out of the corrals. Whatever it was, spooked them so bad that they ran all the way to the mint place, to the bottom of the sinkhole, and that's where they perished. When I mentioned the wolf that I'd seen, detectives were dismissive, just as I had been when the hunters told me of the wolf 3 years prior. No foul play was suspected, and the case was closed. Though there are many strange things that have happened since then, there were none quite as upsetting as the loss of my horse. Cattle continued to go missing, and now we only ride to the place in pairs. My brother and I are considering terminating the lease, as for the moment, the current cattle losses are unsustainable. I've always been a big YouTube watcher, and I found that many stories on the site came from Reddit, so I decided to share mine.